Hello there, it's your Hanish Whiskey Lore. Time for another whiskey tasting. Today I am doing a tasting of the latest releases from Nelson's Brier Distillery. You may remember me doing a tasting of this whiskey sometime back. Beautiful label, historic label that harkens back to the original label that Charlie and Andy Nelson's great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, Charles Nelson, used back in the probably 90s and beyond. I don't know how early they were probably bottling. They may have been bottling as far back as 1870. I actually found, while doing some research on Tennessee whiskey, that we hear that Old Forester is the oldest bottled bourbon because it was bottled in 1870, but there was a distillery in just north of Nashville, around the area that Nelson's Brier is, that was doing was doing bottling. They were purchasing a large amount of bottles, and this would be 2 years prior to when Old Forester was doing it, so 1868. So maybe a challenge to that. This is my thing with Tennessee whiskey history, is that because Tennessee was so long to come out of Prohibition, because there were only 2 distilleries for a long time, and then a third one finally came in the 1990s, that Tennessee just has not embraced their whiskey history, definitely not the way that Kentucky has done it. And yet Tennessee has almost as much history with whiskey prior to Prohibition as Kentucky does. In fact, in some cases, they beat Kentucky to the punch in a couple of ways. So I am working on a book about Tennessee whiskey, and this may be a different book. I'm actually doing a travel book like I'm doing for Ireland that's coming out on November 22nd, and the Kentucky book, which is out now, Experiencing Kentucky Bourbon. And so there's enough distilleries now in Tennessee to make a book very interesting. And actually, the Irish book has taught me how I can better produce a book on Tennessee whiskey and their distilleries. But I do want to write a history of Tennessee whiskey as well. And so I'm going to get around to that at some point. But right now, I'm neck deep in trying to get my Irish book taken care of. It's a lot when you're self-published and you have to do all this stuff yourself. So, tell you a little bit about this whiskey. This is well, in comparison to this is a wheated Tennessee whiskey. So all the liquid in this bottle comes from the state of Tennessee. Otherwise, they would not be able to call it a Tennessee whiskey, and it goes through the filtering process. So it is wheated. It's the old family recipe, so on and so forth. And this is a high rye. Not only is it a high rye, but you'll also notice that you do not see the word Tennessee on this. This is a, in fact, this doesn't even say bourbon in big letters. Like, I'm going to do a review of their other classic, or their reserve bourbon, which is a higher proof than this, and I'll do a review on that soon. But this whiskey is, it says classic, a blend of straight bourbon whiskeys. And this blend comes from distilleries in Tennessee, Kentucky, and Indiana. So it is a sourced whiskey. So that is the difference between this and this. Now there's sourced juice in here, but some of the juice comes from Louisa, their pot still in Nashville. And I just went to the distillery not too long ago on a trip through, coming back from Kentucky, and this is the first time I had the chance to actually tour the distillery, and I will tell you a little bit more about that tour in the next video. But let me do a tasting right now on this. So this is the Nelson Brother Classic. This is coming in at 46.65% alcohol by volume, very specific. Again, this is a high rye, so it's going to have a bit more rye in the mash bill because they're using a blend of different whiskeys from different areas. I sort of wonder whether there's that when they say high rye, if there's actual rye whiskey in here, and maybe, well, no, it doesn't say. It says a mix of bourbons, so it does not say a mix of rye whiskeys in there as well. So figuring it out. There's a little information on the back of the bottle, but not a whole bunch. Okay, so on the nose, I get that herbal rye and a mint that kind of comes through. There's a little hint of, well, there's more than a hint, actually. There's a lot of oak in there, and then toffee. There's a little bit of toffee note in there. And I'm now to the point where I'm like using the word toffee and caramel interchangeably. To me, they're kind of the same thing. I might get some argument on that, but I just hate saying the word caramel, because I grew up in an area where you said caramel, and then I hear everybody saying caramel, and I'm like, oh, that sounds so weird to me, but okay, whatever. So you'll notice I fluctuate between the two, but now I'm starting to lean into toffee. Almost like a little baby powder kind of a scent in there. Just a little powdery note over the top. Very interesting. Cheers. The oak hits you first, then some toffee and honey. Honey's nice. All of a sudden, and now a spice comes in. It's not an aggressive spice. So yes, there's a lot of rye in here. I probably consumed that a little quicker than normal, so I'm getting a little Kentucky hug, call it Tennessee hug, whatever we want to call it. On the palate is left a little bit of tannin, and then it's like you got the spice, you got the oak, you got the rye. They're consistent throughout the entire thing. Then after the rye has kind of faded away, you're left with like a coating of toffee on your tongue. It's like the toffee is not recognizable until the rye fades out. Very drinkable whiskey. Last night I was watching the World Series, go Phillies, although we got no hit yesterday. But it's like I was tasting a bunch of different bourbons and I was putting them on the rocks. I don't normally drink on the rocks, and so I thought, well, let me give it a try. And it's really interesting because some of those whiskeys, without the mouthfeel, and me now having them dilute with that ice, I find I wasn't enjoying them as much. It was like the flavors, the depth of flavors were being hindered by the cold and the ice. And if I found a bourbon that I liked when I was doing it that way, I make note of that and say, okay, that one's good on ice. The rest of these, I feel like I should, do something else with them, throw something else in, maybe some ginger ale or something to spruce up their character, because I guess I've just gotten too used to drinking whiskey straight out of the glass, and I'm spoiled now, and I don't want to put ice in my whiskey. Personal choice, drink it however you like, but anyway. Hope you enjoyed the video. Like I say, I'll talk a little bit more in the next episode, next tasting video, about Charlie and Andy. I actually had a chance to meet Andy. I did an interview with him on Whiskey Lore, the interviews. You can find that on the podcast feed. And I went there in the middle of COVID. It was like July 2020, I think it was, and we sat at a distance and we had our masks on and all that sort of stuff. But really interesting conversation. I'll talk a little bit of that history coming up in our next episode. If you enjoyed the video, give me a like, subscribe if you'd like to watch more of them, and please leave your comments below. Have you had Nelson's Brothers? Have you had the Tennessee Whiskey? What do you think of those? Until next time, cheers. and Slan Duba. It's good. Easy drinker.